Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We are going to cut right through the political noise and look at this as an international diplomat would. We're objectively breaking down a highly kinetic, honestly deeply concerning naval escalation right in the Gulf of Oman. We've got two massive military forces operating in incredibly close proximity. The stakes literally couldn't be higher. So let's just get right to the facts on the water.
So what exactly kicked this all off? Let's establish the catalyst. Picture this, a dark night in the Gulf of Oman, right? And the silence is suddenly shattered by direct gunfire from American forces. The target was a lone Iranian-flagged oil tanker that was reportedly trying to break through a U.S.-imposed blockade. Now, I want to be clear here, this wasn't some warning shot across the bow. The vessel was actively engaged and disabled by the U.S. military. From a diplomatic perspective, this is absolutely huge. It's a massive leap from a war of words to direct physical military enforcement.
Now, if you're wondering why the entire international community is suddenly on high alert, just think about this number, 20%. That is 1/5 of the world's entire oil supply passing through this one specific geographical bottleneck. 1 in every 5 barrels of oil globally is immediately at stake in the standoff. When you've got live fire happening in waters that are this economically vital, well, the ripples are felt in literally every capital and market across the globe.
And because of that immense vulnerability, seasoned observers are, rightfully so, sounding the alarm. You have analysts like the BBC's Jeremy Bowen giving some pretty stark warnings that we are at risk of, quote, sliding back into all-out war. They aren't looking at this disabled tanker as just some isolated maritime dispute. No, they see it as a critical precursor. It's basically a spark in a region already completely saturated with military assets and geopolitical tension.
Section 1. The diplomatic reality, rhetoric versus kinetic action.
This really perfectly illustrates the profound disconnect we're dealing with right now. On the one hand, we've got rhetoric from Washington. President Trump is out there citing very good talks and expressing optimism about a potential diplomatic deal or ceasefire. But out on the water, the unvarnished reality is that U.S. forces are actively engaging in disabling vessels. It completely proves that the American strategy of maximum pressure isn't just symbolic posturing. It's being violently enforced on the high seas, totally regardless of the optimistic political messaging we're hearing back home.
If we trace this chronologically, we can see exactly how we arrived at this explosive moment. Actually, it started back in late February when the U.S. initiated a strict blockade on Iranian ports. Over the intervening weeks, this blockade quietly but successfully stopped dozens of ships. But, the tension just kept mounting. And that led directly to Wednesday's kinetic engagement, where American forces actually shot and disabled the tanker. The physical enforcement has just escalated significantly.
Section 2. The Iranian response. Defiance in the Straits.
Now, let's look at the other side. The Iranian response has been incredibly swift and deeply defiant. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, has explicitly stated that the Strait of Hormuz will only reopen when, and I quote, aggressors' threats come to an end. From a diplomatic perspective, this is a major complication. Tehran is taking this unbelievably vital global artery and linking its status directly to the cessation of foreign military actions. They're basically using the strait as their ultimate piece of leverage. So the really crucial point here is understanding the actual operational readiness behind that defiance. We've got senior Iranian parliamentary figures, like Ibrahim Rezai, telegraphing a shockingly high readiness for retaliation, stating that Iran literally has its finger on the trigger, ready to deliver a harsh and regret-inducing response if concessions aren't granted. That shows us the threat landscape is completely primed. Make no mistake, the Washington insider community is taking these coastal defense capabilities incredibly seriously.
Section 3. The margin for error. A fragile ceasefire.
You see, in a modern strategic context, a blockade essentially zeroes out the margin for error. We aren't talking about abstract statecraft in some distant boardroom here. We're talking about actual human beings operating in extremely high-stress environments. A single miscalculation by a tired young ship captain or maybe a drone operator just staring at a screen, that is literally all it takes to trigger a wider, uncontrollable conflict. The safety buffer is just gone.
And the consequences of that kind of miscalculation? They aren't theoretical at all. We have to factor in the severe retaliatory threats already established on the American side. Over on Truth Social, President Trump has threatened intense bombing should certain lines be crossed. When you combine that explicit threat with Iran's finger-on-the-trigger posture we just talked about, Well, you see exactly why international diplomats view this purported ceasefire as incredibly fragile.
Section 4. The trillion-dollar standoff. Macroeconomic consequences.
Zooming out a bit, this standoff represents a massive, immediate vulnerability for the entire global economy. Like we mentioned earlier, a full fifth, 20% of global oil and liquefied natural gas is effectively locked down and blockaded right now. This is definitely not just some isolated regional dispute. It's essentially an artificial chokehold on the very fuel that powers international industry, logistics, and just daily life.
And because of that chokehold, we're seeing a really clear political tension playing out. On one side, there is the undeniable, immediate hardship of skyrocketing fuel prices. That's really testing the economic resolve of the American public and international allies. But simultaneously, you have President Trump declaring, "I think we won." It is a rather glaring diplomatic friction, right? Taking a premature victory lap in Washington while a very real, very volatile tinderbox is literally still burning in the Strait.
Section 5. The diplomatic framework. Can it survive?
Okay, so is there a way out? There is currently a specific diplomatic off-ramp on the table, known as the 14-point memorandum. But for this framework to actually survive, a few sequential milestones have to be achieved without fail. Step 1. Actually secure the agreement around the memorandum. Step 2. Maintain the highly fragile ceasefire long enough for the ink to dry. And Step 3, which is honestly the most difficult right now, prevent any further tactical maritime engagements. Because if tankers are continually being shot at, all these steps just immediately collapse.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a critical assessment to ponder. Was disabling that Iranian tanker a necessary show of strength to enforce a geopolitical boundary? Or was it the exact spark that will ultimately ignite a devastating regional war? Must this blockade be maintained at any and all costs, or, by opening fire in the Gulf of Oman, have we already crossed a threshold of no return? I want you to evaluate the facts, weigh these massive strategic risks, and ask yourself where this standoff inevitably leads. Thank you so much for joining me for this analysis.